What's up, everyone? Welcome to the exciting conclusion of NieR. This is Retro Encounter. I am Josh Curry. With me is Peter Triezenberg,
Hello.
Chris Gebauer,
Hey, everyone.
and Alana Hagues.
Hello.
So we have done it. We have gone through hell and back to save our daughter. We're at the end of NieR. What did everybody think?
What did everyone think? I mean, I like the game. It has a ton of flaws, but I really like the game.
I like the
What do you like
story.
I guess that's kind of what I mean. I do like the story. I do like the world. I like a lot of its elements, but it is not the easiest game to play.
It definitely has its pitfalls, but I think I'll agree and say that I do really like it, and I like the story and the world. The music.
Yeah.
I love the music. It's incredible. And I like the characters. But there are a lot of gameplay elements that don't work and don't quite fit in. I think... Go on.
Like the text adventures?
No.
I still think you're wrong about the text adventures, Josh. This is
Not
the fun
text-
part.
The text adventures were good. I mean, more... So, like, some of the side quests and some of the combat, but I think overall it redeems itself in certain places.
What places do you think it redeems itself? I'm just interested.
Well, like I said, the story, I think what really surprises me is that I'm quite difficult to please with endings. So the fact that I like all 4 endings is good. I think the story is something we mentioned last time, was how the story is never overwhelming. And then even at the end, even though the big twist comes about half an hour before the end, or an hour, it doesn't overwhelm you with anything. So everything is easy to take in, and it all makes sense as well. But it never also outright tells you. So you kind of have to figure out some things. Like, I don't think it outright tells you about... You have to work out the parallel between Gestalt and Replicant NieR / Shadow Lord plus your NieR.
Kind of. When they have the big reveal with Popolo and Devola, they during that conversation they give you the 4 documents.
That's right.
Those
Yeah.
documents, like, flat out, they make it very plainly easy to understand, like, this is what's going on if you couldn't piece it together.
Yeah. It's nice
Yeah.
that they don't vocalize it, though. It's nice that they give it to you in writing, I suppose. Like, it's
See,
not...
I'm the exact opposite.
Well, it's interesting that it's interesting because we mentioned last podcast, I think, that that some of the menu screens would occasionally pop in with those, like, real, instead of the diary entries, they would have the much more clinical, like, descriptions, which we now know is coming from the Gestalt Replicant project. And so it's interesting kind of how they've been foreshadowing it. And then if you do New Game Plus and you replay it with the knowledge you've gained from ending A, it changes a few things around and kind of lets you see, I think it lets you see in greater detail, like, how this is all tied together. And I think it's quite interesting.
So, since you brought up New Game Plus, Peter, why don't you just explain exactly what happens when you start New Game Plus?
So, all right. So when you start New Game Plus, you'll start at the midpoint of the game. You don't have to replay the first chunk of it, but really the major difference is that you'll be able to understand the dialogue of the shades now that you know that they're actually people, and some of the bosses will have additional cutscenes and lines of dialogue so they kind of tell their own little mini stories, and a lot of it is pretty much just to make you feel awful for killing them. Almost all of them have just something. They're just kind of like minding their own business when all of a sudden this angry old man and a talking book come in and decide that they're going to murder them because they need a boss fight there. And it's interesting. Whether or not it is effective to you is, I mean, within your own personal purview. But Josh.
Well, no. So actually, I would argue. Previously, just arguing that I wish it would have been in the story and very obvious, instead of putting it in text form, I would argue that the ending of NieR, they very effectively show the progression of shades and allude to a lot, and I feel like it already has kind of that emotional experience. You look just in general, and it's kind of, it works out because it's it ties in with gameplay. If we started with the really simple shades at the beginning and they stayed simple the entire time, it'd be very boring. But as they progress, it looks like these shades are taking on a level of intelligence. They're becoming more. They're having weapons. They're getting bigger. They're gaining armor. You move on to where the area, which we'll come back to all of the area, but like they're actually coexisting with humans. There's a side quest right before you go to the ending, and you're asked by this like little girl. Like there's a little girl inside your town that says like she saw a shade. That is a really bad tongue twister. And you will like keep wandering around trying to find it, and you find out that she's kind of like trying to protect this shade. And when you eventually find the shade, it's literally just hanging out. And it's like, all right, well, for this side quest, I'm going to murder this shade that's not doing anything wrong. So I think it already does a very good job of portraying all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so to add in the conversation pieces from that, I think is almost unnecessary. I mean, it's interesting because it gives another side of the story, but.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a big running theme in the game, especially in regards to the twist about the shade, is NieR's like single-mindedness in his quest to save Yona is ultimately really destructive. Because not just because even when he finds out the truth about the shades, he's still pretty callous about like killing them. Like you encounter the Shadow Lord, which
is you.
Which is
you don't have to say spoiler. This is already a spoiler podcast.
Well, I wanted to make sure we weren't saving that for later. But yeah. So the Shadow Lord, the villain of the game, is you, the guy you were playing as in the tutorial, and that whole thing. He's still like in the name of his mission, even when confronted with the fact that there's another NieR and another Yona, and they just want to be together too. He goes to kill the Shadow Lord. He even says like, "Am I supposed to sympathize with you?" And it's true. He's not the kind of person who would be. And it's kind of the game kind of presents these stories and leaves it for the player to decide. I think it's trying to invoke that kind of reaction in you, that kind of distances you from NieR himself.
So I guess this maybe me being a calloused old man, I have no problem with any of the actions of NieR. Even when I find out that I'm going to murder myself. Because that is
like
not...
you actually have a child that you would wish to protect.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like, I'm really sorry. Like, this is terrible. I know what I'm doing to you. But you've already put me through hell. Like,
Which actually, I wanted to ask too, Josh, like, what does this change your perception of the beginning of the game a little bit? Because I know you were kind of down on the beginning of the game.
You've been so excited to ask that question.
I have been.
Alright, so, and maybe I didn't fully express this effectively during the last podcast. Story-wise, it was obvious it was going to tie into the story somehow. I think it's very interesting that you've played as yourself, your different self. I think story-wise, it is very, very interesting. I fundamentally, at the end of the day, though, still have an issue with any game that starts you off and make you experience everything the game has to offer and then rips it away from you.
No, that's fair enough.
And so it's one of those things, it makes the next hour or two of the game really boring. When you have this, and I think it actually starts really interesting. You have no idea what's going on. It jumps you right into the action. You have all these really cool abilities. And it starts at a really good pace, and then to move on right from that, and it just dies. And you're like, well, I don't have this, I don't have that. Like, I'm plodding along, and town's really boring at the beginning.
It's really made worse by all the tutorials that you are pulling out of creatures, and then it's stopping gameplay. So that's I think also makes it a little bit more amplified in terms of how annoying it is.
So I overall really I enjoy the tutorial for what it is. I just don't like that conceptually. Also, though, I feel like being able to play through that tutorial definitely shows the developer's hands on what the story is going to be.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I knew that as soon as the Shadow Lord was mentioned, I was like, all right, well, that's us. And that's probably him from earlier. And there's 2 books, so there's obviously 2 books. And like you told me that there's 2 books, which I didn't notice when we were playing through. I was like, well, this is obviously, they did something here. There was some sort of agreement. This Shadow Lord is you. And immediately I thought of Infamous. I was like, oh, there's some sort of time travel thing. Like, I'm going to come back into the past and like, I'm going to fight myself, but I'm pushing myself along to make me who I need to be able to combat this. And that tutorial makes it very, very obvious that the Shadow Lord is you, at least in my opinion. Which I kind of
No, I'm with you. Once you are told by your future self, I mean, when there's that pact where it says, at the beginning of the tutorial where the book tells him, I'm going to make you stronger, you just have to surrender yourself, or whatever that line is, but which pretty much is like giving your soul.
Very sinister.
I knew that you're coming back. That version of yourself. I didn't think it was going to be soul versus shell as a conceit. I thought it was going to be more almost reincarnation theory, future selves versus past selves.
Yeah. And that's the shell thing is what ultimately caught me off guard as well.
Exactly. That was the as you put it earlier, Peter, like that's the big twist, and I knew one was coming. We all I think do when we play that game. But the question really came down to what was it going to be, and that turn specifically was out of left field for me, and I really dug it.
Yeah, it was interesting. But then I also kind of feel stupid because everybody's probably watched Blade Runner at some point in their life, and when you look at the Japanese title and it says replicant, I was like, oh yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah, but isn't that crazy that that's a word that they invented because for the movie because they couldn't use android, and yet no one uses replicant outside of Blade Runner, really?
Yeah. But yeah, it's just one of those things when you look at the word gestalt, it's like, oh, all right. But if that had been in the American title, I would have immediately gotten that.
Yeah, they released the 2 versions, yeah.
Yeah, and so it kind of plays off of that, because I didn't even think about it, and I didn't even think about the Japanese title even being different until the point where as soon as they mentioned replicants in the game, I was like, oh, well, okay, yep, that, I feel like an idiot.
There you go.
Yeah,
what did we think?
Go ahead, Peter.
Go ahead, Josh.
Go, Christopher.
Thank you. My proper name.
Yeah.
So what do we think about our cast of characters?
Fantastic.
Emil, Kaine, Vice, what they go through.
King of Assad.
Yeah, the King of Facade and his awesome mask.
So
he gets a rough end of the deal.
All of them get a rough end of the deal.
Yeah, they're all varying degrees of unhinged, which is not uncommon for this developer. But even so,
no one's actually happy, really.
But I think that's wonderful.
Except for debatable Yona, and I agree. I think it's actually very refreshing.
See, and that's again, this is all my terribleness comes out on this podcast. I'm sorry, but like, so I finished this right before we did this recording, and like before I came onto this call, I jumped on and was like, well, what is everybody's reactions? Everybody's like, oh, like, great game, this or that, like, oh, this is such a classic, can't wait for a sequel. And then everybody's like, but that ending though, it's like, it's so sad. Like, I just don't like playing the game because the ending is so terrible. And I was like, the ending's realistic. Like, I love it for that. Like, you can't go around murdering whatever they are, even if they're just animals, like murdering all sorts of things, going through all, like, hell and back, literally hell and back, and not be changed by that. And I think they do a very good job of everybody is in a constant state of sacrifice. And that's really what you have to go through.
We were joking before about the Devil Popola fight at the end, and just being like, couldn't we just calm down and figure this out?
Yeah.
But, there's that moment, and there's that actual moment in that fight, and her response is basically like, you want me to stop, but you just murdered this person front of me.
Yeah.
Exactly. So why would I stop to you, player character? Even though, us playing the game, we're like, yeah, let's stop. You don't have to do this, but she's like, you just kill it. Exactly. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and they had a great line earlier in the game about revenge, because it was about the crazy little boy that had his brother die in the junk heap. Jacob or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And that happens again and again, and every time your character's like, yeah, when we know what revenge is going to get us, and it's this, and you're just like, whoa, what about you? What are you doing this whole time?
I told you that plot was going to get worse and worse, like, and that even on New Game Plus, it even gets, like, because now you know what the Shade is thinking the whole time. But, like, the fact that, like, his brother got like crushed halfway, and he tried to pull him out, and then all you hear is
Pulled
just
off his
rip.
arm.
And I'm just like, oh my god!
Yeah.
Yeah,
No wonder-
one thing that I read in the Grimoire Noir, or Grimoire NieR, that I thought was kind of cool is they go into more detail about the psychological effects of the younger brother ripping off his brother's arm. And that's why he has a mechanical arm when you meet him in the second half, is because as like a weird self-mutilation penance, he always like basically starts cutting himself, and eventually it gets so bad that he replaces his arm with a machine arm.
Yeah, that makes sense. I looked at it, I was like, why does he have a mechanical arm? Like, what has he been up to?
Stuff that there's no explanation for except in the visual. And then when I was skimming through and reading stuff, I was like, oh, okay, that's taking that extra.
Interesting. Yeah.
There you go.
God.
Yeah, this game's dark.
Yeah, it's super dark.
Very.
There's actually nothing happy. Anytime there's about to be something happy, they immediately cut it short with something brutal.
No, the
like the King of
ending's
Facade.
The ending's
And
so happy.
It's the exact opposite of that.
It's not,
the
though.
image of happiness
You
with
have
the
doomed
understatement
humanity to
that
extinction.
humanity is going to, well, that all, basically remnants of mankind are going to be extinct within a generation.
But it doesn't.
It doesn't tell you that, but that's what's inferred.
The replicants will be okay.
No, they won't. They can't
No.
reproduce, Josh.
No, I
Because
don't know.
they'll all get the black scroll and die. No, wait.
I mean, I could.
I don't know. The Black Scroll part, I still don't vaguely understand. I'm not
I
gonna.
don't
lie.
think they ever directly explain what the deal with the Black Scroll is, aside from
Especially in comparison to whatever the white, whatever the hell disease.
Chlorination.
Yeah, thank you. The chlorination from the arrival of the dragon and the giant.
The only reason I remember that is because I think of chlorine. I think of whitewashing something. So they're
Yeah.
whitewashing society from the world.
Look at you making connections.
Yeah.
You're a smart boy.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so the Black Scroll, because at first I had thought it had to do with original NieR, and because they're so close, and because at the end they keep talking about like how he being around things makes the shade so much more feral and have so much more issues and be more stable. And so I was like, well, maybe that's why Yona.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, because of their closeness, he's making her more unstable. That's why she has the Black Scroll. But then the King of Facade makes that, like, that ruins that whole theory.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
So
That's the best I got.
so we just to cut in a sec. We were actually right about the Black Scroll. It has to do with someone's gestalt like relapsing, which is what causes the replicant's body to start like shutting down, basically. So yeah, inevitably every single replicant is going to come down with the Black Scroll.
No,
and
they're
die.
not. Because as NieR, you're going through and mass genociding all of the shades. If there's no shades left, they can't relapse. And then nobody will get Black Scroll. And then society will last forever because they're androids.
Not how it works, I don't think.
They're not
I think
androids.
because
Not
they
androids.
can't retrieve data, because they can't retrieve like data or whatever from their original self. That's what causes the disease.
Okay.
That's actually one thing that's weird, Josh, is that all the people we meet in the game are not androids. The androids are Devila and Popola. They make a distinction between android and replicant. One is a shell that's not explained but isn't machine somehow, and it's more like a homunculus almost.
Yeah, it's like they split. It's like they split one person into two biological entities.
Yeah. Whereas, like they take the genetic material from a shade and basically create a shell for them to inhabit eventually. When
Okay.
the diseases of the world are apparently finally purged.
Oh,
And then the androids are Devil and Popola and other pairs of twins in other parts of the world which exist to make sure that eventually gestalts and replicants will refuse. And that's their purpose.
That's a fair correction. But that also brings up something that really, really bothered me. As Devilo's dying, and Popol's like, I can't stop the bleeding. And I was like, you're an android.
I know, that was...
Yeah.
And there was actually no blood visually,
There's
very
nothing.
clearly, when everything else bleeds.
Everything, like,
This is
there's at points, like,
Saga 3.
Yeah, there's at points when they do that stupid Diablo perspective when you're going through the area underneath the Emil's house.
Right.
Yeah.
And they cut away back to the one of the rooms when you leave it, and I had blood on top of the ceiling of the room I had just left.
Yeah.
There's blood everywhere in this game.
Yeah. Weird.
Sorry, From Software. Caveat beat you to it.
So
right.
that's actually a good thing. Is like I actually think Cavia beat a lot of principle, ignoring the difficulty of the game. Like, 'cause I think NieR overall is a very easy game.
Yeah, it's not that hard.
But with how they parse out story, that you have to search for it, and like I don't know, I saw a couple parallels of how From Software kind of sets up their video games conceptually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a lot of environmental storytelling.
Yes.
It's the idea of items and the objects you interact with themselves can tell you more about the world than what you're doing.
Right.
Which is awesome. And great. Because it's the kind of thing where, especially if it's not necessary for you to enjoy the game, you can dive into it at your own pace.
Yeah.
I mean,
It makes you wonder if they're going to do that in Autonoma when that comes out. Because I know we talked. I think we talked about this last time.
Yeah,
like with Platinum Games making it, we're probably going to get more of a straight action game. But it'd be nice to see if they could work in some of the environmental storytelling stuff into it as well.
So I had wanted to cover this at the end of the podcast, but let's just do it now. Since it's kind of a natural point.
Yeah.
What is everybody's thought about the sequel? Like,
I'm excited.
I'm excited because it's going to play. I mean, as long as Platinum actually is able to put any attention into this game,
it's real
and
Platinum,
they're not
not
super spread thin.
Platinum.
Exactly. But Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is going to be done by the time this all starts, so I think we'll be okay.
Yeah. What about you, Alana? What do you think?
I think I agree with. I think Platinum need to pay attention to the story. I think it's quite possible they can do some environmental storytelling because whether it's going to be in the same world as NieR or not is another question. I think the developers confirmed that Emil is going to appear in some way, shape, or form, and possibly Kaine as well. But
that could mean a lot of things though, because they had them as DLC costumes in Drakengard 3. So, like, I don't know if that means they're actually going to be in the story or if they're just going to be like appearances.
Yeah, hopefully they'll be in it in some manner. But I think, as long as the only thing they need to do really is fine-tune the combat and the gameplay, and I think that the rest of what NieR is will fit in naturally.
So I
do think he mentioned it's based off of. I think it's based off of this play that Yoko Taro did like a while ago. It's like a lot of the characters are the same as from this stage play he did, and he mentions that the characters in Autonoma are going to be androids, and there's some kind of like devastated Earth future like thing going on. So I feel like this might actually be taking place before NieR.
Yes, that would be really interesting. I was just reading actually, somebody said that it would be really interesting if somebody covered the ground between Drakengard and the beginning of NieR, and I think that would be really interesting. So if that did that, then I would be very, very happy with that.
I think it would be easier not to F everything up.
You've got a 1300 year time skip to cover. Like,
exactly.
You could. There's a lot of ground there.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go the exact opposite. I have zero desire to play the sequel. So for people who listen to Deus Ex podcast, there was so much there at Deus Ex that I wanted just to be better, that I felt like anybody could come in and fix. Like, there's a lot of just simple things you can do that makes the game better. It's not really contingent on one necessary thing to be done, but it just overall just things could have had more polish. With NieR, I feel like the story is fantastic. I don't think there's very few ways, except for getting rid of the text adventure, that this story-wise the game could have been better. Gameplay-wise, like, hey, yes, 100 different ways that it could have been better. And everybody looks and is like, oh, Platinum, Bayonetta, like, it's going to be great. Like, it's going to be fantastic. And I view it as we are going to get a game that has really good combat, but nothing that made NieR special.
Completely agree, but that's what also intrigues me about the idea of it being a prequel. is you can get away with, especially with, again, this is just things I picked up from Grimoire NieR, which, for everyone listening, is an online thing that Alana found for us, where people basically translated, what is it, a book that was written for Japan market in Japanese only? Is that right? Is that what it is? Guys, help me out there.
Yeah, I think so. That's what it is.
Okay, cool. But there's a huge war that starts from when humanity still exists, before they go through the whole Gestalt program, of the Legion, which is basically just the shade, it's before the shades, so it's the white phosphorus disease. All those afflicted are being led by one creature called the Red Eye, and it's basically just this ongoing civil war of humankind against the afflicted and those that are still, I guess you could say, even sane. And then that continues on even after the Gestalt program. It kind of restarts. So you could do basically the androids as saviors of humankind as a prequel, as Alana was kind of alluding to, the idea of androids having to hold off the tides of, oblivion kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that would be simple enough that you could have a great action game and story would be there. Yes, Josh, I think it would be so much lighter. It would be far less interesting. So much of the mystique of this game is that there are things that really are almost close to being bad, but somehow it works in the context of everything else. It's weird because you could make a flawless action game and it wouldn't be as interesting to play. Because a lot of the issues I have with NieR are also what are endearing about it. Because the second it's about to get too annoying or too frustrating or, oh my god, this really is bad, you're on to the next thing. I don't want to say gimmick because I don't think I do think it was thought out, but it never overstays its welcome with each bit of strangeness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard to make a game where you're jumping around like that. I think especially in an era of... This was one of those games that died because it was a AA game in a AAA world in a lot of ways. But with AAA marketing and budgeting, there's just no way you could pitch a game like this and be like, so I'm gonna make one area, it's gonna be a text adventure, and it's gonna be totally different than everything else that happened so far. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great, and everyone's gonna be like, woo, it's different. Yeah. They'd be like, you get to go back to your desk and never pitch a game again.
Maybe somebody should have done that for the text adventure.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing Yakuzawa got to start earlier.
Exactly.
I want to say I'm excited for Automa, but I do want to say, so Cavia shut down after making NieR. It wasn't a big hit. They don't exist anymore. But Drakengard 3 was co-developed with a lot of the same people with Access Games, so the guys who did Deadly Premonition. And Drakengard 3 is worse than NieR in a lot of ways. It looks worse, it runs worse. It had even less of a budget. But it had a different developer and it still maintained that same level of complete craziness. And I'm hoping we don't know, that could very well be the case. Our worst case scenario I think we're looking at is that it's going to be a polished action game that doesn't have any of the charm or mystique of NieR. But a best case scenario would be that it does retain everything that made NieR and the Drakengard games so enjoyable, but it just has a more solid gameplay foundation.
Worst case scenario, we get Korra.
Oh, don't say that. That's heartbreaking.
Okay, yeah, that's a worst case scenario.
Yeah. I couldn't let that go.
That's fine. I honestly think it's going to be a $30 game like Korra, but it's not going to be. I think they're gonna be putting in a little bit more effort to it because it's, I don't know, because there's enough of the original team, like Peter said. There's a few people, key members involved from the original NieR with the game. You'd like to think that they're gonna.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I think it's only going to be a 6-hour game. It's not going to be a 20-hour RPG.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm looking forward to it when we get time to play games this year because there's so much coming out.
Dark Souls 3, babe.
Star Ocean 5 and Zero Time Dilemma apparently come out on the same day.
Oh, great.
Like, what am I gonna? I don't know what to do.
Parse your time accordingly. Did anyone? One thing, especially because it's similar to Josh. I was able to finish a lot of this game very recently. How about did anyone have issues with the kind of standard, almost every game has them, tropes of friendship and I'm so glad I found you kind of thing, finding your place in the world? Did it feel tedious to you to have the characters go through the motions in a lot of those ways, or did you feel like with this world, and especially with what you learn of these characters being these replicants, so there actually is that much more to the idea of discovering humanity, do you think it works a little bit better to have those kind of cliched moments?
I think it works because I like these characters, and
Fair.
especially with Kaine, because you get, again, that's another thing I forgot to mention. In New Game Plus, you get Kaine's whole backstory, and it's like really, really sad. But
and you get to hear the shade inside her, right?
Yep, that too. And he's a creep.
Yeah, he's a psycho.
Colossal. He's a creep. But like it is. But like even then, like these characters, like yeah, they kind of go through the bog standard like JRPG plot motions, but they're so likable in their own like weird, crazy way that I think it works. But that's just me.
So I think I'm gonna pick on a game that I love, Persona 4. You go through those just kind of what you're saying, that tropiness, but at the end of the day, the world's so great for them. I mean, granted, they could get thrown on TVs, ignoring that. But overall, it's like, yeah, you're going through this melodrama that's not that important, but things aren't that serious. You look at somebody like Emil, and it's like, he has eyes that turns everybody to stone. He finally fixes that. The person he likes gets turned into a wall. And then he goes on a quest to solve it for her, and he gets turned into a bone man. And kills his sister in the process. I feel like they go through enough crap together that it feels justified.
I'm totally with you. Partially, I'm just doing the devil's advocate. I was just curious. Using the Persona 4 as a comparison, though, I do think that this game suffered, NieR, and by suffered I don't mean it's flawed because of it, but the localization team is not the best. And outside of Grimoire Vice, I do think that most characters the translation is not that fantastic. It's just serviceable, and it lets you move on, and it's good enough. But in terms of the actual dialogue between characters, a lot of the game was just okay, or, again, serviceable for me. And this is a game, as we've talked about, that I ended up really liking, but I was a little disappointed with some of those moments of just like, because we're friends now. It's like, you could have that exact same thought there, but instead of saying, but we're friends now, and so that makes it all okay, you could have much more interesting dialogue. Granted, yes, you have to take into account that they're doing dialogue that has to be fit into whatever the few seconds of Japanese exists in that cutscene, so you have to, hit your 3-second mark, so it's a little bit harder, and you're restricted to what can be written in the translation. But
I think one of the things that's hard too about the whole friendship thing, and minor spoilers for Star Wars, the new one that just came out. People complained about. Is this okay? Can I do this spoiler?
Go ahead.
All right.
I'm not gonna fight.
So people really complained about Rey's relationship with Han Solo in that, and everybody's like, well, how does she look? Because everybody's like, oh, she looks at him as like a father figure, and it's like, how's that possible? They've only known each other for 5 minutes. And it's like, there's so much time in between that we do not see.
Sure.
And I think that is perfect for NieR. Like, you look at some of the side quests. Like, if you tried to catch that fish and you never caught the fish, you were gone for like 3 months.
Yeah, I know.
And ignoring how terrible a parent he is that he stood on a beach, not going back to his like sickly ill daughter's bedside, and he stayed on a beach and tried to catch a fish that whole time. There's a lot of time period that I think we just miss.
Yes, but my issue isn't the idea of the conceit of friendship. What I'm kind of talking about is more just one of those flaws to this game, which I think is it's not fixed, but it's okay because I like everything else that's happening. I do think, and I felt it a lot more in the second half, is the writing of the characters in terms of just what they're saying, not what they mean or the intention behind it, but the actual writing of it gets very tedious, and it's a lot of repetition, and it's a little bit of just like, okay, we get it, we're saying it again, all right, let's move on to the next thing.
Although,
yay, friendship, yay, we love each other,
that being
yeah, we're all exiles, let's keep moving.
That being said, when Vice is leaving and you say, like, you call after him and he's like, you know what?
Oh, he's the best.
Told you not to call me that, but I think it's okay now.
But it's okay now. Don't get too high on yourself.
That was fantastic.
He's the only one that's got that kind of that has a good arc to just his linguistics. Everyone else, it's so straightforward and obvious. He's the only one with subtleties in the writing.
It's because he's a book. He's knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
He used to belong in a library. He soaked all that knowledge up.
That's how books work.
Yep. Just set them next to each other and they get smarter.
No, in fact, children, that's how books write themselves. There's no such thing as a printing press.
That or monkeys.
Exactly. Someone somewhere is like, what? Really?
That's why my school books are so expensive? They're written by
I
monkeys?
find myself a monkey.
Ah.
I knew it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I actually want to talk a little bit about the characters. I mean, specifically Emil and Kaine. We talked about Vice a little bit, and I think we can all agree that Vice is like the standout star of the whole game.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, him and Kaine.
And I love Kaine. I hate what she wears. It still irritates the hell out of me.
Yeah.
And I didn't think this would happen. So when I travel a lot, so whenever we do these games and like I'm traveling, I always think about like I'm sitting on an airplane. When this old lady looks over at what I'm playing, how badly am I going to be judged for what I'm playing? Great thing about NieR, playing at home. Didn't think I was going to get shamed. Wife walks into the room. She looks at me, looks at Kaine, shakes her head, walks out of the room, stops like halfway out of the room, comes back, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And so, literally, my response was, "I didn't make her wear that."
That is amazing. That's actually fantastic.
Yeah, and so I think Emil has a great arc. I really enjoyed that. And then I overall really enjoyed Kaine. I knew this was going to happen. I kind of assumed with what they set up at the very beginning. We talked about this last podcast that there was going to be so much more to her than met the eye, and that's why I kind of thought it was kind of doing her a disservice to dress her the way she was, because she's basically just supposed to be eye candy, and it's like she's much deeper than that. I enjoyed watching kind of like there's multiple elements of just like talked about Emil about through the transition, and then we talked about Kaine. We kind of alluded to her choosing to die to be able to save the village. And then the ultimate moment after that is you've watched Emil and Kaine go through so much, and both of them sacrifice so much, both for the village and also specifically for NieR. And then the great moment when Pope was like, "Yeah, they can't come to the village. Like this isn't okay."
They're freaks and they scare people.
Yeah, and I think there's so much emotional kind of like roller coaster where you're like, all right, Kaine's kind of a jerk. She keeps leaving. She won't listen to me. All right, Kaine's cool. Kaine saves everybody. Like, and then like you're all of a sudden like your mission's like, I have to save her. Like I know I'm supposed to go save my daughter, but like I feel indebted to her. Like I have to do this. Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of great character moments there.
I completely agree. And to your point, there's a lot of subtlety to Kaine that I appreciated. And Peter, quick question for you, since I know you've at least played through a little bit of New Game Plus. Kaine can understand shades, right? Not just the one inside of her, but she can actually hear the language of shades.
I actually don't know if they ever explain that.
Okay.
And because so in her backstory, her grandmother is killed by that one boss
That
shade,
giant thing, yeah.
that thing, yeah. And that's when she almost gets killed, and in really, really graphic detail describes like how badly mangled she's been when she gets possessed. And then that shade can talk to her and is basically just constantly tormenting her. So she basically just has this constant inner monologue going on. And I don't think they ever like address whether or not she can understand the other shades, like, or if it's just the one inside her head.
So okay, maybe this is just what I'd like it to be. So maybe I'm projecting just a little bit, but I for some reason thought that she can understand shades, and I thought it was such a that's such a horrifying and kind of cool element that she's doing all this for NieR because she likes him. And she sympathizes with him, and also feels indebted to him to an extent. But she's aware that they're killing these creatures that are human. Even if she can't completely listen to them, she knows it from the shade that's inside of her, so she knows what shades are. And yet she still is going through with it, this slaughtering of not just monsters, but again of deranged humans, because of her attachment to these people. Which makes it just such like a much more twisted little like, yeah, no, I'm fine with this because I like these two. Let's keep going.
That's a really interesting perspective, definitely, because you have Emil, who at some point actually almost like refuses, like in Aerie, like he refused to kill like a little bit. So it'd be
and then something triggers.
Yeah, it'd be interesting that he's being sympathetic when he doesn't fully understand, and you'd have somebody who actually fully understands and just, I guess, ultimately doesn't care.
Yeah, or cares enough about two individuals that, the statistics don't matter.
Yep. Which that's what I said from the beginning. There's so many parallels between the Shadow Lord and NieR, which makes sense because they're the same person, but how their behavior and how they go about it, like, and I feel like many people in that situation would do the same thing. I think that's ultimately the most redeeming quality of NieR, is you have NieR who acts out a lot of the things that you probably yourself would do, and then Vice is there to actually actively state almost verbatim what's going through your mind. And that's why they're such a dynamic duo, because you can totally see, like, yeah, I would be doing what NieR's doing, I would do whatever I could to get my daughter back, and then my inner monologue about how stupid people are, how much I hate this, why are we doing this, why are we helping this person, this is idiotic, and it's like, there's Vice, like, right there saying exactly what I'm thinking. That was fantastic.
And then she's there to just be like, F you, book. And he's like, shut up, hussy. I'm smarter than you.
That is the most I have ever heard the word hussy used ever.
Outside of doing classical theater, that is one of the few times I've actually ever used that. Yeah, seriously.
One of the things I found interesting, which they didn't do anything with, we've mentioned the bosses multiple times. Did you guys catch, like, the names of all the bosses?
I did, but more because I cheated with the grimoire that Alana shared, because she's the best.
Yeah, because, I mean, there's, like, Hansel and Gretel, there's Hook. Hook's the one that killed Kaine's grandmother, like, Wendy, Geppetto, Sleeping Beauty, like, all of these are based off of fairy tales, and they
even the robot P-33 is supposed to be Pinocchio.
Yeah. And then Cleo's the shade that's sitting on Pinocchio, because it's the fish from Pinocchio stories. Like, there's so much there. Like, I know it ultimately has literally nothing to do with anything that happens, I think, with the exception of maybe Yona's fascination with fairy tales.
Yes. That the game itself is a fairy tale. But and to me, that ties into the whole idea of it being taken from the most obscure or hard to get ending from Drakengard. That series continued on its own, and then you have this, and this is like the fairy tale version of what could have happened from that universe.
Yeah, I didn't play Drakengard, so I have no idea.
Exactly, so I have no idea either.
I'll say you sound really smart right now.
Yes, I sound super smart. I know this because Peter told us.
I mean, thematically, you kind of have a running theme of not just with the talking books, but of words in general. So the fact that the bosses are all named after like popular like idealistic stories. Like I feel like there is kind of a theme going throughout the entire game.
One of the things I found interesting too with the whole P-33, like
Mhm.
they talked about how because you killed whatever the monster was that was before Geppetto. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was so. There's a whole story that because you murdered Geppetto, P-33 didn't know what to do anymore, and because of that, P-33 took on Cleo and protected Cleo because
it
P-33
lost its mission directive.
Yes, and there's so much like little, like we talked about this before. Like there's so many intricate storylines that are going on that are not obvious when you play it, and they do become great when they are kind of like sussed out.
Yeah, and it is cool because P-33 is one of the first times that your party begins to ask those questions. Because during that fight, Vice is saying like, the Shade is a lot more functioning than most of the ones we have fought before. Like this one is clearly trying to speak, and NieR's response is, "I don't care, it's a Shade. I'm going to kill it."
Yep, the best response.
Yeah, the only response. Yeah. So do we each actually have a favorite character? Is it just Vice? I kind of want to hear who everyone's favorite character is. Peter, you start.
Oh, I love Vice too, but Emil is a personal favorite.
Emil.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Josh.
Vice is the easy one. He's the really, 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 really easy one. But I love the arc of both Emil. Emil's the easy one, and then the King of Facade.
The King of Facade?
Yeah, how his whole story goes is so intriguing because you have somebody that is... I mean, he's a little boy that does not deserve to be king, and he runs off on his own, and he's very petulant, like he's terrible, and then you save him, he's like, I'm going to be a good king, and fast forward 5 years, and he's taken somebody as his queen that he shouldn't have, he suffers this great loss, and he's kind of at a crossroads with his life, and he chooses to step up and be something bigger than himself. And ultimately, you could make the argument he saves you at the end to make sure that you can, like, complete your journey. And even during that, he sacrifices himself possibly to make sure that it happens. Like, he's definitely not a main character, but
he's great.
He elevates himself beyond just kind of a tertiary character.
Oh yeah,
he does.
Hey, Alana, what was your favorite character?
Emil's my favorite. I think Vice and Emil are my favorite too. I think Emil is the most interesting. Like Kaine is extremely interesting, but on the face of a first playthrough, Emil has the most development go into him, I believe.
Absolutely.
And I really loved the bit at the beginning where you have to go into the research facility and things start to make sense. I believe some of the Black Diary entries that we'd mentioned earlier refer to Patient 6 and Patient 7, so Emil and Hallower, and just the realization that Emil is this weapon. I think when you first see him anyway and you realize he hasn't aged at all, you just think, something's going on here. And I really think Emil is sweet. It's quite endearing seeing this floating creepy skeleton go around and be like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, and adorably speak to you going, hi, friend.
Hello.
You guys need to get the DLC.
Yeah, you can't get it. You can't get it anymore.
You can't?
Oh, wait, for Dragon Guard or for NieR?
For NieR.
Yeah, you can't get it anymore in Europe. Really? No, I couldn't get it on the disc, so... Well,
It was on the... I didn't download it, but it's on the PlayStation Store. I don't have it, but I looked up what it does. And aside from just adding some playable missions where you play as a replicant NieR, it changes all the magic spells so that they look like flying Emil heads. And that's the best.
That's awesome.
I think Emil possibly gets the happiest ending because I'm at the end of ending B. Emil isn't dead. Like, it ends with Emil's head in the middle of the Facade desert, and he's just like, oh no, I'm gonna go and find everybody, and then his head starts rolling off, and he's like, this is really difficult to do. And I'm just thinking, oh, you're so cute. Like, skeleton. thing.
Yeah, so Josh, Emil's head survives the explosion and gets rocketed into the facade desert.
Of
And his
course he
head still
does.
in consciousness, and he's just rolling around trying to find everyone. And as he's rolling off into the distance, is saying, "I hope Kaine and Vice are okay. You leave those two alone for 5 seconds, and things go
Yeah.
bad."
He's so selfless, even when he's committing essentially suicide to make sure everybody dies or survives.
That moment was amazing.
And he's just like, I really hope that they're okay because I've kept them together. Because NieR's so upset, and Kaine, like, she can be so mean, and Vice just argues with everybody, and like even at the end, he cared about everybody else so much more than himself.
But
Yeah.
that really, the way they handled that whole moment of sacrifice, and then him being alone as the shell is cracking,
Mm-hmm.
and it zooms out into this just
yeah.
overwhelming blackness and gets smaller and smaller. And as that's happening, his dialogue of, it's okay because I had friends, starts changing and morphing into, I don't want to die.
Yeah.
It's not time. And then it just, condenses and basically becomes a singularity. The way they handled that whole sequence was fantastic.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, it's very good. Like, a lot of the stuff for friendship revolves around Emil as well. But that makes sense, because Emil he's
been alone for forever.
Yeah, alone for forever. He can't look at people. And then all of a sudden he's this little skeleton, and he has friends. And he's really young as well, physically very young. Yeah. So he has this mindset of a child, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
And as Josh hinted to before, he commits genocide.
Oh, they kill so many people. Yeah. That, so what did everybody think about the genocide? I've kind of put my 2 cents out there. I'm kind of interested. Did you guys have like a kind of sinking feeling when it was going on? When like Emil was refusing, did that kind of make you want to hesitate?
No, it didn't make me want to hesitate. Sorry, Alana. Go.
Sorry. I felt like it was going to happen. I think, being a weapon, I thought Emil at some point would either freak out or lose control. So I was expecting something to happen, but I had this sinking feeling, and when it did happen, and I think his remorse was really well done. I felt horrible for him. I didn't want to hurt him. I was just so angry that it had to happen that way. But yeah, I think I felt sad for him more than anything.
And that happens, I think, during one of the best boss battle elements. A lot of the boss battle
is cool.
Yeah, a lot of it's just like you hack and slash. You have your Dark Lance out, and then you have your Dark Gluttony. And you just kind of roll through bosses, and you just hack when you can, and otherwise you're throwing lances at things. And this one actually is like, you have to be cognizant of your environment, you have to be moving around. Like, that whole sequence with the town, as you moved around, it was the first time, really, and really the only time in the game, it's like, you need to move around. Don't just walk in a straight line murdering things.
The way they use that. Yeah, the way they use the town is like kind of the entire area turns into an arena for the boss is really cool.
Yeah.
The area got the best bosses. It's the Wendy and Hook are both there, and they're both
for sure
utilize the environment, and it's really well done.
Yeah, it's overall my least favorite area because you don't know where to go when you first get there.
It's hard to navigate. Yeah.
And it's the most annoying area in terms of design and the fact that there's no one there to talk to you.
But they do have like the 2 coolest boss battles there.
Mm-hmm. The one, I gotta say, the one that attacked right before the time skip, the one that attacks the hometown. I don't know its name, but that boss is really cool.
That was really well done as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
So one thing that's cool to me about the area is, and again, I'm gonna be making my own conclusions from what I've read from that grimoire, but is that a lot of those people, as is clear by that final boss fight there, are shades, or are replicants that have been reunited with their shades.
Right.
Because they function as normal people. And the people in the houses are saying, that's my husband. But they're not saying it in fear. They're saying it in anger at you. Like, stop killing him. That's my husband.
Yep.
And there was one thing I read in the Grimoire NieR that talks about how, while in the area, and so technically this could include the Eyrie, where Devil and Popola are trying to take care of that area before reuniting Gestalts and Replicants, there are possibly other sections of the world where that reunification has happened, and they're living like normal humans now, souls back into these new shells. Whereas that's not the case in the world that we're exploring in the game. So there's this weird thing where I feel like the Eyrie is a town where a lot of the people have been able to recombine with their gestalts, and so they don't talk to anyone else because they kind of know the reality of it, and they're like, we don't want to talk to a replicant. You're not really human. Yeah. You're not human, so get out of our town.
Yeah, it's an interesting play on you think they're very backwards and not progressive,
but debatably they know more than anyone.
Right, and it turns out that they actually are the most accepting overall. They were able to find peace when everybody else was choosing to fight, essentially.
Yeah, and their fear of you is that you keep killing these things that they either know better about or just can live in harmony with. So they're like, please just stop screwing with our town, and then you destroy it.
Yeah, that was a really interesting moment when you kill the sister, and the brothers.
Oh yeah,
like, I don't care if she's a shade or not. That's my sister. And yeah, that whole section was really, really well done. And it really, from that point on, like that's the tipping point, I think, at least for how I did like my collection of getting the symbols.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's really the tipping point of like, all right, now we're coming to a close, but the story's really ramping up.
Yep.
So yeah, that was definitely the most iconic kind of sequence, I think, for me, beyond the Emil stuff, the King Facade, like I mentioned.
Mm-hmm. So Facade is also just a cool area. It's goofy. It's fun. The rules, everything about that world is just a little off in the best way possible.
Yeah.
Although the entrance to Facade, when you have to do the tour of the town,
it's
that's
the worst. That's actually somehow worse than the text adventure part. I didn't think that was possible.
So what is your problem? What is your problem with the text adventure part? We need to address this.
I view it as massively lazy. The stories themselves were actually very interesting, but imagine if you actually got to experience those.
But I suppose in a game that throws different elements at you, it works. So you've got the facility, which is a bit more like roguelike or like Diablo-like, and then you've got all the main combat areas. So it's just a bit different. It's a bit different, but it's also, it works in context.
See,
like the sections are really well written, and like that's just something I appreciate is I like the individual little stories. And at first, like there's some of them that are really fourth wall breaky and kind of jokey. There's some that are really sad, and there's a couple of them at times like it even flat out starts referring to the dragon from Drakengard, and like so it's like the closest thing we get to like a bit of world building here. And I don't know, I think it's really interesting.
I agree they are very well written. The one that sticks out to me though is imagine if you did the girl quest where she's in that castle and she's wandering around and she's looking at the paintings and she reaches in and then she goes into the room and there's all the dead bodies. Imagine if they, to keep it different still, made that first person. And imagine the stress that you
old school dungeon crawler-esque.
Yeah, and imagine the stress of that as you're going through that, as the water's rising, as you're seeing these just atrocities and whatnot. Like it relies on your imagination, which that's the great thing about books is usually whatever you can imagine is 100 times worse. But imagine if we were extremely confused because we were in a first-person element, and we're stumbling through that. I would argue. I'd argue that'd be much more impactful.
It sounds like a cool idea. I don't know if budget-wise that would be something they'd be able to work in. That's another consideration to take in. But I don't know.
Ultimately, I think the text adventure was a conceit because they didn't have a budget to do that. I think that was their solution.
I do think it was a workaround. I do think that they probably had other ideas for that moment that were going to be more in depth with the text adventure as its core. But I do think they decided let's go all out with the zaniness of it, because also some of the most interesting writing is in those sections. So I do think they also just decided, let's go. This is what we're going to do, and let's do something different and see if people are actually going to pay attention. Because part of the hook of some of those questions is like if you skip through, you can't answer the question unless you go to a guide. So they're like, so how about this riddle, this one detail about the color of eyes and how many people got killed? And if you're trying to skip it, it's not, you can't actually look it up because it changes.
It also asks a different question if you fail it every time.
Mm-hmm.
Or changes the eye color or the something, which is good. Yeah.
I don't know, and we've talked about Lost Odyssey, and everybody knows on this podcast that I hate Lost Odyssey.
You're wrong.
I'm not. I'm really not, though. That's the fundamental part. And that was one of the fundamental parts I took issue with Lost Odyssey was the journals. I just, at the end of the day, I think some of them is great story, and they are wonderfully written, but I just would have loved to see it done better. And I know everybody's going to argue, like, oh, it's written really well, which it was. I'm not arguing that. And how they shift from you being in real world and it slowly drifts out and the text slowly gets better or bigger. Like, I think they handled it very, very well. But I would have rather experienced it myself.
It's pretty much how that shakes out.
Sorry, guys.
It's okay. We're used to you being wrong. It's fine.
Oh, see, that's the secret, though, Peter. Is I'm the host, so I'm always right.
Oh, somebody really thinks he's...
Can't argue with that.
It's like, yeah, Peter, depending on your answer, your schedule on the podcast will change dramatically.
No, I've already kicked Peter off the podcast before.
Have you done that to all of us?
No, only Peter.
Not true. Did it to me.
I don't think that was recorded, so it doesn't count.
Damn it.
Yeah,
doesn't count. Didn't happen,
folks. On air a couple times because of T-Rex and Parasite Eve.
So does anybody have anything else they want to talk about with NieR as we kind of slowly wrap up?
What I like about NieR, and we talked about Dark Souls earlier. Sorry. Excuse me a second. But not just the idea of environmental storytelling, but this is a game that has stayed with me. When we were playing it early in the playthrough, and even now after finishing it, there's just so much of the world left open, and even with the excess of random facts that comes in Grimoire NieR, there's still a lot of stuff open to interpretation. And how can you piece together all the little, the whole puzzle? And I like that. I like games that give you a world, they give you the core story of the characters you're following and all the rest of it, or the avatar that you're playing as, and then they go, and then there's all this other stuff, and you can take these little elements if you want to, and try and figure out where they fit, and create your theories, and this is one of those games. So what's really awesome and rewarding about playing a game like NieR is that you can think about it for forever. And it's just endless in that way. And it's really cool. That made any sense.
When I think of NieR, I always think of, and I hate this phrase, but it's more than the sum of its parts.
Okay.
I think if you look at a lot of different elements of it, you're like, oh, the combat's not that good, or there's a lot of fetch quests, or there's this text adventure in there, and you can look at each of them by themselves, and you'd probably say, hey, that's, if we're going to go on a review scale, it's like, oh, that's a 4, that's a 7, that's an 8. I think collectively this game's a 9. Like, this game is legitimately really great. And it's one of those things that kind of bucks the trend of how you usually look at games, because you kind of try to look at, like, break it down into its elements, and it's just more than all of that.
Yep.
And I think you mentioning that it resonated with you is a perfect, like, like expresses it perfectly. Because it is one of those things. Like, granted, I've only finished it now in like an hour and a half. But even while I was going through it, like I was wrapped up in the story of the characters. I genuinely cared. And this will be a game. I don't think I'll ever go back and do a new game plus. I honestly don't think I'm going to play the sequel. But this is going to be a game that I always remember. And I'm always going to look at it very fondly.
I had a friend ask me while I was playing it. He was like, well, because he's also someone who likes older games and likes playing through some classic stuff. And he was like, is it worth playing through? You know, what score would you give this game? And I laughed because, to your point, some of its parts, I was like, it's kind of hard to grade it. But, you know, if you really were trying to break down its elements, I would maybe give the game, you know, if I was reviewing it, like a 7.5. But it's the best and most enjoyable 7.5 you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
Because like you said, if you're breaking down a lot of stuff, it's never broken, but there's a lot of points where you hit invisible walls that shouldn't be there for certain, you know, just points of just exploration, which can be super frustrating. The combat really isn't smooth. How they play with their storytelling and their perspective. You know, it's fun that they always change it up, but it never goes all the way. It's always just kind of dipping its toes in the water, and yet at the end it's more memorable than games that I think are incredibly, almost perfectly made, but once I'm done with them, it's like, okay, can shut it off, don't care about it anymore. That experience was fun, enjoyed the popcorn, what's next? Whereas this is one of those games that when I finished last night, I then read for 2 hours and went to bed at an ungodly hour because I was like, what else can I know about this world? Give me more things to parse out. Yeah, it's a special game.
Yeah, it's easily one of my favorite games that we've covered on this podcast.
Yeah.
Good.
Yay, it's success.
What about you, Alana?
Yeah, and
What
Peter.
was your... No,
sorry.
we're doing Alana.
Peter's
done.
Peter's done.
I'm out of here. I said the truth.
Truth.
Yeah, I think everything Chris said. I spent I finished it about a week ago and literally just I sat down and sort of thought it feels relevant. So the thing I can compare it to, very recent, is Xenoblade Chronicles X. In like the kind of, I'm only about halfway through Xenoblade, but I know the plot twist and I know the kind of important things like about building the separate mimeosomes, the bodies that are basically waiting for their souls to be refound, or their real bodies to be found. So the issue of like, how is humanity going to survive in some ungodly disaster is a relevant topic that is really well and interestingly developed here. Like, it's not like, oh, we're just going to emigrate to another planet. This one is like, no, we want to stay on this planet, but how are we going to do this? And it makes you think, like, if you're in that situation, do you agree? And if you're NieR, then, and if you're placed in the same situation as NieR, then what would you do upon finding out that you were a replicant? And I think that is why I really like this game, because it just makes me think. And if we're going to go on the review scale thing, I think between a 7.5 and an 8 is probably where I'd score it, because of all of the little issues I have, but the weighting on the story and the characters is quite important for me. So I think it deserves slightly higher up on that end. But I certainly think I'll still be thinking about this game, and I'm not sure if I'll go back and play it, but I will definitely check out the sequel.
Yep. I'm with you on that.
All right, Peter, I guess we'll listen to your thoughts.
Yes, you're going to let me talk? Okay. I mean, I've probably made it clear already, but I love this game. I really do. I'm a big proponent of narrative in games. I think NieR has one of the most interesting, like, completely crazy, but really intricate and interesting stories that I've experienced in this game. And I feel like I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much if it wasn't as a video game. So that's always a plus. Like, I feel like the fact that I played this as a game is a big part of why I enjoyed it. And I'm also a sucker for ambitious JRPGs, even if like this one didn't really have the budget for it. So It pressed a lot of my buttons, and I enjoyed playing it. Although I do agree that I probably would have, like, if you gave me this game for review and told me to give it a score, then yeah, it would probably get around an 8 probably from me, just because it's hard to ignore some of the more glaring issues. But yep, overall, much love, happy times. Wow.
I didn't mean for us to get into scoring the game, but thank you for taking that journey.
It works.
Yeah, it does.
It's my job.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's right.
So, thank you all for joining us on this, as Peter said, journey. Let's go with that.
Mm-hmm.
We will have our written final thoughts very shortly after this goes up. In the meantime, just kind of general stuff. As always, you can send your emails to retro@rpgfan.com. You can go on to the website RPGFan and actually voice your thoughts on the boards. We try to read all of those, we try to respond to them, and we try to include them on the podcast when necessary. Please go on iTunes and rate and review us. That helps massively for us, so that would be much appreciated. And then, as a reminder, in April we will be covering The World Ends With You, which is one of my favorite games of all time, so hopefully everybody else agrees with me, or else Peter might not be on podcasts anymore, I don't know.
I thought Mike was the one who actively disliked 12E. I'm open-minded.
You better be very open-minded.
Oh man!
Keep your mind open for you.
You will share my opinion, or you will be.
I tried to play The World Ends With You a couple times, and I just have a hard time wrapping my head around that combat system. But I'm gonna do it, Josh. I'm gonna do it for you.
You better do it for me.
Go for it.
And then recently we actually included you guys in the vote for what game we'd be playing, and it went so well. I think that'll be kind of a mainstay moving forward in some sort of element. But you guys, with a resounding vote of 63%, chose Xenogears for June.
Oh,
wow.
nice.
Oh my.
Yeah, so you can probably, moving forward, just follow rpgfan.com on Twitter. Be safe that way, but if you want to absolutely know what is going on at all times for this podcast and also for the votes, because they'll be coming through my Twitter account, you can follow me at JD Curry on Twitter and get in the vote and have your voice known that you would rather watch us play or listen to us play Xenogears than Breath of Fire 3. So that was the ultimate vote. Huh?
Jesse loves Breath of Fire 3.
Yeah.
I'm so glad Xenogears won.
And if you guys want to see the rage about that, go back in time and listen to the Tyranny podcast, as I'm pretty sure at least a quarter of those podcasts we argued about Breath of Fire instead.
Oh.
But in the meantime, that is going to do it for us at Retro Encounter. Thank you for listening.
Hey, yep.
Bye!
See ya!